Hey, welcome back everybody to another Observability Expert Insight series. This series on this quarter is going to be the Observability Onboarding Speedrun, Unlocking Easy Mode, and this is going to be kind of level one, mapping the realm. You know, when you're first starting out your journey with monitoring with Splunk AppDynamics, there seems to be, quite a bit of information that you guys have to learn. And in addition to, thinking about what you have to plan, what you have to deploy, what order you should deploy it in. And then, it's a very critical time because it sets the tone for the whole rest of your journey. There's templating, there's, pipelines that you're going to be subscribing to or setting up. So coming up with a good plan up front, understanding kind of some of the best practices behind that, that's going to set you up for success. Now, before going too much into the content, I'm going to be your host today, Christopher Bonanno, and we are joined today by our good friend and colleagues, good friends and colleagues, Drew Osborne, who's going to be our expert speaker leading us through today's content, and then also Calvin Miller. We've all had some skin in the game on this, so we all have some good insight that we can provide, and it's going to be an awesome session, awesome series, and we really look forward to working with you guys on it. So let's keep this going. Now, some housekeeping items. We're going to assume that you guys have a general understanding of what Splunk AppDynamics is, its core concepts, its core components, and then you already have a controller, and you're just starting to, think about how you're going to roll this all out, how you're going to, scale at your enterprise level, what agents are going to be involved and things like that, what things to start tuning and thinking about standardizing, etc. During this call, the guest microphones will be on mute the entire session, not only for privacy reasons, but also for us to kind of keep track of, the questions coming in versus, this is going to be a recorded session that's not only going to be on the Cisco community page. It's also going to be sent out to you guys via email if you registered, and then it's also going to live live on YouTube. So definitely check us out there. We'll give you the link a little bit later. And then if you have a question, please use the Q&A options. If you're looking at WebEx and you're like, wait a minute, I don't quite see it, go down to the bottom right, three dots. You'll see the Q&A button there. That just helps. So if you have a question, it persists and then we answer. People can go back and look and not ask the same question because the chat kind of, might shift through or sift through where, we might ask a question. You guys might be interacting with us, giving us feedback. Hey, the microphone is low, or hey, I don't see the slide, something like that. Give us feedback, give us interaction through the chat, and try to ask your questions in the Q&A. Obviously, if you put your question in the chat, we're still going to try to answer you, so don't worry about that. And then as a disclaimer, we do make this content for you, but it is not meant for you to go and take it and go to your other customers and try to offer the same services. This is owned by Cisco for our customers and in the spirit of enabling you all. But at the same time, we are here to help, and at the same time, it is our content. So please don't take it and claim it as your own. All right, so without further ado, and now that we've got those housekeeping pieces out of the way, let's go ahead and hand off to Drew Osborne.
Hey, Chris, thank you so much. Yeah, again, real quick, my name's Drew Osborne. Great to have you with us today. Here's the agenda for today. We're going to start with some planning considerations, including understanding your application architecture and monitoring needs. And we're also going to cover team access, maybe some best practices on naming conventions. The actual agent deployment will be covered in a follow-up session. So you can see solution mapping. We'll talk about middleware communication, some network firewall considerations, and then of course, operational readiness at the end. So that's good. All right. Understanding your application architecture is critical. Let's discuss how many servers you have in production and non-production environments. What roles do these servers play? For example, are some web servers and some application servers? Do they run unique code? If you have architecture diagrams, this is where we would want to see them. It's also important to understand the business purpose of the application and how it delivers value. Ideally, have your business team demonstrate this for you live. And so you could see that's really what this slide's talking about. I want to turn it over to the other panelists though that we have on here. Do you guys have anything you'd want to add to that?
Yeah, when you're looking at your application flow and what kind of infrastructure is behind it, and then, you can start to think, do I have multiple applications that are structured in the same way? Are they, all on the same kind of server infrastructure? Or are they in cloud? Understanding obviously the environment and everything, it starts to help you template so that you don't have to, reinvent the wheel with every application deployment. So it's real important to start understanding the architecture and then understanding, what value you need out of it, what holes there are in monitoring, and then start to replicate those steps. And, right out the gate, you can start thinking like this.
And I just want to add, Chris brought up a good word in what he was saying, and that was templates. Once you get your architecture form, you can start creating those templates so you can easily roll out this type of information onto your servers to make it just easier for you to instrument the monitoring architecture onto your application. So setting up templates is a good thing. Having your templates so you can easily roll things out is a big plus when it comes down to looking at your architecture and how to get everything instrumented.
And I'll just add one more quick thing about that is with those templates, you can use them as checklists as well, right? So you can mark which servers are, when you have a good template, you can mark which servers are actually done with the installation. Maybe one had a problem, like a one-off. It's nice to be able to track that stuff because then you can perhaps not have certain blockers actually block you. If only one host didn't install right, you could troubleshoot that and move forward with the other ones with good tracking on a good template.
Oh, true.
And so thanks. So let's map your monitoring needs now with AppDynamics. Are you looking for basic application performance monitoring? Do you have a browser or a mobile app? Do you need to monitor end user performance or browser real user performance? Is synthetic monitoring required for availability or API checks? Do you want any server visibility on it? What about network flow with the network visibility agent? We can also do database instance monitoring. We can really tailor our solution to meet your need. And so it's about understanding, again, from the previous slide, what application architecture you have and how does these 6 components essentially fit into that, and where would you use these features?
And looking at the diagram on the right, the flow is actually makes sense where you usually start with the APM and infrastructure, then you're looking at database and browser mobile. From there, you go to your network monitoring. Then you probably want to end up doing some synthetic monitoring, just doing some automated monitoring of jobs within your system. So this is a good flow of how you would just start off adding in your agents so you can get that monitoring of your environment.
Yeah, great point. Just to add one thing or one additional point to that, right? Most clients are going to start off their deployment journey by doing one module at a time, right? But you can significantly increase your deployment agility if you, in the future, as you mature with the deployment categories and they become standardized, and we're confident in our org that the deployments tend to work, you can actually try to do all agent deployments up front. It's a lot harder to manage that though. I'll just call out if you don't have good, tooling and automation, but it can increase your agility to implementation significantly if you wanted to look at a strategy that works that way. So, Chris, is there anything you want to add there? All right. Middleware communication in your backends. We want to consider what type of calls your application makes. Are they web calls? Do they use message queues like MQ? Are you calling third-party APIs or cloud-based APIs that might be serving a function that your app uses? What database backends do you use? Do you have a, Oracle or SQL backend that we need to monitor it? Knowing this helps us plan the right monitoring strategies and plan for the right agent configurations and deployments.
So true. The beauty of AppDynamics is largely when you start deploying, you start to automatically start seeing, the connections. But then if there's something that's missing, then you can immediately start, going into refining transactions, identifying additional backends that you need to call extra attention to and separate out from maybe a big group of them. So it's going to be real important for you to understand how the application works. So if you are an implementer versus somebody that fully understands that application, make sure that you have the right people on board. Make sure you have either an application owner or the architect that can help them set up all of their communication, or a developer that is maybe hard coding or dynamically coding their application so that they're calling out to these other services externally. So it's going to be real important for you to get those correct people up front so you understand the context that Drew's spelling out for you here.
Yeah, I'll just add, just following what Chris just said, that way you make sure you get that full picture of that end-to-end communication throughout the transactions that's going through your application, by making sure that back-end infrastructure is being reached and being able to be displayed within AppDynamics.
Yeah, and Chris used the term when something's missing, and Kelvin reiterated there, without a complete picture and knowing, the context of the application, this is where we identify maybe AppD didn't auto discover something that we need. And so getting this information up front helps the validation phase again. All right, network and firewall configuration. Depending on your agent types, you want to verify that your agents have outbound connectivity to AppDynamics endpoints. You could be using SaaS, right? And so that would be going over the internet. If you're on-prem, you can be a little bit more specific for sure, but you want to configure your firewall rules to allow the required ports and IP ranges if you are using SaaS to avoid connectivity issues. And we want to really make sure we've verified that the right port requirements are open. We don't want to deploy to prod and have agent data not report because we forgot a firewall rule, for example.
And then there's different connection points, just to kind of add on to what Drew's saying. It could just be a simple test with a curl command or SCP, or if you have some sort of Wireshark or whatever you guys normally would use to check. You probably have your most critical applications running in some sort of demilitarized zone, right? Your DMZ, and then you also probably have disaster recovery. If something happens where, your servers are going down or you get some crazy influx, you want to make sure that you account for not only the key players, the key servers and resources, no matter where they're running, hybrid cloud, on-prem, what Drew was giving you examples of, but you also want to account for things that aren't going to always be reporting, but are going to need to be reporting should there ever be a need, like we were saying with the disaster recovery. If you have disaster recovery servers laying there dormant and then they spin up, you're gonna not be happy if they get added to the load balancer, but you can't get any monitoring on those because you didn't account for doing the testing up front. So, it becomes very important. Definitely go with some sort of automation script. If you have a ton of servers, at an enterprise scale, obviously, or if you have, connections from, various cloud services, it's, just do your due diligence, have somebody go out there and test all the connectivity, make sure all the firewalls are open, and that you're going through the proper channels between security and networking. And we're going to touch on this again later on, but it's not a difficult step, but it is a tedious one that you do not want to miss.
I could mention one instance that happened to me. What you want to make sure, especially in your controller info.xml, the SSL line in there has to be set to true when it go into CSAS and the port 443. So you want to make sure that that property is set properly. I had an instance where a customer was trying to connect agents and it wouldn't connect, and the problem was they did not have SSL enabled. So that's just gotcha. I just want to mention when looking at network ports and having the agents connect to the AppD controller.
Good point. It's definitely gotcha.
Hi, Drew. Drew, if you're speaking, you're on mute. Sorry.
Thank you. I was. Additional planning considerations. Consider your deployment model, SaaS or on-premise, as this can affect your planning. Ensure network and firewall ports are open for connectivity. Plan for SSL and secure communication to protect your data. Review integration points like extensions and REST APIs, and decide on agent rollout strategies, manual, automated, or scripted. Also plan for agent upgrades and compatibility in the future. Version control is very good here. And again, good credential management using a secure credential store helps manage things the most securely. Just ensure you're doing secure credential management.
Very important considerations, and understanding these things up front allow you to kind of put in requests for things in parallel, or more up front, so that with network access, maybe you guys have with our controllers for SaaS being up in AWS, maybe your company has its own AWS, or maybe it's on Google's platform, or maybe it's on one of the other major players and providers like Azure or OpenShift, etc. No matter where you guys are, your networking team is probably going to want to review things with you. So they're going to want to prioritize probably cloud to cloud. As long as you start getting the wheels in motion going towards that way, they'll guide you. It's not going to be everything you have to architect. It's just you have to explain and articulate what it is that the controller is doing. We have great documentation available to you. We can drop it into the chat so that you can kind of follow along with that and bring that back to the networking and security teams. But that's probably going to be where you're going to have a lot of focus there. And then, just to kind of reiterate, security, along with the networking, you might have certain connections that are going up to the SaaS controller where they're going to want to validate SSL, some sort of maybe it's a load balancer or some sort of a proxy in between, as opposed to maybe your APM versus your analytics traffic going up to the controller. In certain cases, they might prefer, hey, we have dedicated IPs for our controller, that one, it can just go straight out, up and out. But since the enterprise console, or maybe things for enterprise console or event services, which is in Elastic, we have them divvied out for our customers, but because it's dynamic, the IP range changes a bit, and they might prefer there to be a little bit more checks and balances along the way of that traffic. So then, you're going to want to see where that SSL verification is going to be happening within your network, going out or in or coming in. And in addition to, just making sure that, your integrations and everything are working. I don't necessarily want to iterate everything that Drew went over very succinctly. But I did want to really cover the networking gotchas that I've run into as both a customer and as a customer success engineer. Sorry, Calvin, what would you say?
Well, I wanted to mention item 4 and 5 because, of course, I'm doing a deployment next week on the agent, EIS on deployment. But I think that is so important because you want to have an automated way of deploying your agents so you can keep them up to date, so you can take advantage of those new features coming out with new agents. So I just wanted to point those two out because I think they're very important because we're constantly putting new features in our agent and having a way to upgrade those agents fairly quickly with a dependable way of putting them out there is a big deal so you can stay up to date on the new features that's coming out within AppDynamics.
Real quick on that, what it support will support agents up to 2 years old, right? And then, beyond that, we just recommend within a year, or what's the recommendation there, Calvin?
I'm not totally certain. I think it's 1 year support, go back 1 year on the agents, not 2 years. But I have to check into that. I'm not 100% sure.
That's my
So in short,
understanding as well. Yep. 1 year.
so in
I
So in
believe.
short, if you don't want to put a support ticket in and get the easy answer of, oh, did you try updating your agents first? If you don't want to just get the easy answer from support, then make sure that they're up to date.
So now we should have a pretty good picture of what the application landscape's going to look like for the app that we've designated for implementation of AppDynamics. We're going to know, essentially architecturally, does it have web servers? How do those maybe talk to various backend services? They might be distinct services. Are they Kubernetes? Are they distinct VM hosts? Our discovery to this point should have captured all that information. We're going to have a really good picture of all the dependencies for that are going to need to be mapped for end-to-end monitoring in AppDynamics. And the end result is, once we've installed the agents or scoped them properly, we're going to hope we see an accurate representation of that real user flow or real traffic. All right, team access and RBAC considerations. Defining team access early is essential. Role-based access control ensures users have appropriate permissions, that they're programmatically assigned, we don't have any security concerns, and we align with standards in our organizations. We recommend integrating with external authentications providers. SAML's generally the choice for streamlined user management and security these days.
Especially when you're first starting out, even if you have to make some like dummy shell groups and have some people validate, if you're an implementer, if you're an AppDynamics admin and you're implementing things for other people, you don't necessarily always know what you're looking for. You have a good idea, necessarily everything that's supposed to be connecting. Hopefully you have some diagrams and you have an idea, but one can only hope versus if you have that app owner actually validating for you, then you know that you're on the right track and you're going to have less rework, later down the road. And then in addition, around when you're doing the I mentioned earlier the requests that you can submit internally in parallel. So when you're doing your firewalls and you're doing things like that, you can also start connecting with the teams that's going to be supporting the application, going to be using what you're building, so that you can find out, what's their team structure. Do they have kind of like a tier 1 group that does sanity checks, and then they would just need like read only, versus do you have like a tier 2 group, a more advanced group that starts doing some of the monitoring governance, like setting up health rules or building out dashboards and kind of baking things more into their flow? And then do you have like a tier 3 group who's going to be not only wanting to be able to create health rules and alerts and things like that, they're also going to want to get, be able to adjust business transactions and, how the actual flow map is looking, or additional, maybe they're going to reassign JMX MBeans to point to the correct metric that, maybe AppDynamics is picking up incorrectly. People that are going to be refining what everybody else is going to be looking at. So, obviously having some, checks and balances in place of who can do what, even past the point of validation. And, when you're just deploying, it becomes a very critical point. And at the same time, it's not something that you have to put off until it's already all deployed. Like Drew said, start setting up that SSO, and then you can start getting those buckets created in like some sort of Active Directory or whatever flavor you're using, and then associate that with some sort of ticketing system. So then you as an admin or an implementer, you're not sitting there manually putting users in there. You want that to be done kind of automated in the background. Maybe you have some sort of approver that says, yeah, hey, this is my application. I want this person that's putting the request in to be able to modify health rules or modify the flow map that everybody else is looking at. Or, hey, you know what? This person is a tier 1. I just want them to be able to look at it and help us monitor the environment, but I don't want them to be able to adjust other stuff. So let that be on the other group. It's less liability on yourself. And at the same time, it's very important for compliance internally to every company, especially if you have, secondary customers or, depending how how deep your model goes there, you're going to want to make sure that you safeguard yourself and the information going through your applications.
I totally agree, Chris. You covered that perfect. I think you hit every point I could think of. Great job on that.
Thank you.
All right. Naming conventions and limits. Here we're referring to the application name, the tier name, and the node name. That's really the main objects of APM monitoring. AppDynamics has a character limit, of course, for the application and tier names. That can be up to 100 characters, and agent node names can be longer. I think it's important for you to think about how you want to standardize things across the board when you're picking things like these. So you're gonna follow generally a standard for your app name, tier names, or your node names. And my colleagues here will talk about some of those.
Well, I'm going to talk about tagging. We have it listed down at the bottom. Some items you might not want to put in the agent node name or the tier name. You can also use tiers, and with you can also use tagging to determine certain items, so you can cross over the applications and group things within health rules and dashboards, so that you can have a central view of items that may bleed over into different applications, and you can always group them together using tags. So tagging is a new item within AppDynamics, but it is very helpful when it comes down to creating health rules and dashboards.
Great call out. Tagging is a newer feature. Back when I was a customer, the naming convention was a major gotcha. When we tell you guys the limits, the character limits, we're not trying to tell you to overachieve and try to get 100 characters in an application name. But at the same time, you want to name things that are meaningful to your guys's, and not only internal terminology, but things that maybe are not that, maybe people that aren't the app owner, maybe they want to have some sort of context. So you want to have meaningful names that explain the relationship of what that overall goal is. So for the example that we have here, there's e-commerce, where the variable that we were giving as an example is the business application name. And then the example of it would be, it's an e-commerce website for your company. And then within there, you have multiple tiers, and one of those tiers would be, the grouping of nodes that all have the same code, and they're grouped together under tier name. And it would be like check inventory. Now, when you're dealing with the tuning, the business transactions and stuff like that, it's doing it through the tier level. It's doing it at the tier level, is a better way to put it. So if you start overly diversifying things at the tier level, you're going to end up creating a lot more work for yourself. You're going to have to create the same business transactions for 4 different tiers. Say that you break it up by a data center. You have 4 data centers, and you have check inventory 1, 2, 3, and 4, as opposed to just having them all under one tier, check inventory. And then if you want to call out those extra data centers, you can put them in the node name. So that way, when you apply that business transaction detection rules, it applies to all of them. because even though they're across different data centers, they're not going to have different calls usually. They're going to be running the same code just from a different location, and it's going to be based on like how the load balancing is working or failover, high availability, whatever the case may be. It's not likely that you're going to need different transaction rules based on different data centers. And these are just some examples, right? So, if you have, we'll kind of shift down into the node name. This is where I see most people and most value adding extra little tagging or breadcrumbs per se in the naming. If you have certain namespaces, if you want to have it dynamically name the node after the instance that's running, if it's a kind of like a Kubernetes where it's coming up and you need to be able to see that container ID and namespace that it's associated with there, or do you need to call out, is it a VM? Is it in, Arizona, or is it in Rhode Island? Is it in, production? Is there, several of these? So you want to number it. So, or a host name, these are just some examples here, as you can see. And then this would be kind of an example. The PAZ is saying which data center it is, so I don't need to add more into it. It's also associated with the host name. So sometimes the host name, sometimes the things that you already have standardized and named in your environment, sometimes it already captures it for you. And that's what we tried to give an example here. So even though we're calling out the limits, I'm not telling you to overachieve and try to reach those limits, but I do recommend adding some breadcrumbs in there for you to associate what you see at a tier and node level under a business application, back to what it's running in, so that it's easier for you to differentiate when you're creating dashboards and health rules, or if you're just simply trying to associate it back to what it's running in. But like I said, or like Kelvin said rather, there are more things that you could utilize nowadays, where before that was the only option, was your tier and node naming. Now you also have some tagging availability. So definitely try to figure out what's going to be better to put in the name versus tagging. And I highly recommend, when you're doing the deployment, test it out and try it a few different ways, and then set that as your template going forward for everything else. See how it comes in, see how it reports, see if it's as granular as you want it to be, see if it's easy to follow for your support teams. And then once they check off and say, yes, this is exactly how we want it, roll it out to everything. And then keep that set standard. That naming, becomes very important, especially for visibility and how you're going to see the application represented in AppDynamics. Sorry, guys, I went.
Nope. Couple best practices I want to call out, because there's a lot of information that was shared there, guys. Chris mentioned, if you split data centers, tiers by data centers, what that'll directly output for you is twice the amount of business transactions. If you have 3 data centers and you split by 3 data centers, you'll have 3 times the amount of business, because as he called out, they're discovered distinctly per tier. So the best practice is to group those and use something in the node name to tell you which data center it comes from. And another thing I would call out, when you talk node name, make sure you include a segment in there that is exactly how I'd RDP to the host, your SSH to the host. I have seen instances where people pick an alias standard, and when that host goes down, then you need a key to figure out what that alias means. So I recommend you have host name in there somewhere. So prioritize transactions and monitoring. This is where we want you to identify key business transactions for end-to-end monitoring that are tied directly to business outcomes. Your most critical business transactions are the ones that we want to ensure that they're all monitoring. We're also going to plan how to connect end user monitoring and analytics data. This is going to allow you to define custom metrics and perhaps do some unique segmentation strategies that AppD is really powerful at enabling you to do. Now, we also want to integrate your database and any back-end hardware monitoring to give you comprehensive monitoring. We can monitor the back-end instance from the perspective of the instance, and the front end, or with APM, we're monitoring what is the perspective of the application that's reaching out to the database. We stitch that then together to allow you to make intelligent decisions on, is the problem the database or my app? If you have both modules, then we want to configure alerting. That's where we're going to configure alerting and health rules that are directly aligned with the critical transactions that we identified in the first box. That way, we're alerting on things that we know is actionable and tied to business outcomes.
And this segment, I mean, this whole series, this session, we're not necessarily, intending to have you reinvent the wheel in your learning in terms of, understanding what all of these like business transactions and SEPs, which are service endpoints, we're not necessarily trying to reteach all of that to you, but just as a quick refresher, a business transaction, like Drew gave a perfect example of, they are your most critical transactions going through your application. But say that you are also trying to, as a developer or in prod support, you're also wanting to do a comparison of maybe the application that just got redeployed. You have version 1 and version 2. You have maybe a single node of version 2 out there where you're wanting to kind of compare the single hop of, say that you have a full upstream to downstream flow, which is a super important and a great use case for a business transaction. You want snapshots being taken, things like that. But then you also want to, monitor that one hop to see, hey, what's the performance difference between version 1 and version 2? I want that specifically called out. And you can do that very easily with a service endpoint, and you can just monitor that one hop going from something upstream to that version 1 application versus the upstream to that version 2, and you can have them sitting side by side, but at the same time you're not having this extra load on the controller. You're not having all these snapshots being taken, but at the same time, the full flow from start to finish is capturing all of that and taking snapshots, and that allows you to dig in deeper. But then you can have independent views from a service endpoint where it also it gives you a collection of all of the snapshots that would be associated with those same service endpoints too underneath it. So it just really helps put that all together for you. I found that as a big gotcha when I was starting things out, where I thought everything needed to be a business transaction, where they're not. So the very important part for me when I was starting out, and wanted to share that experience with you.
Well, Chris, I'd like to talk about identifying key transactions also, because there is a limitation for business transactions. So that is the reason why you want to identify your key transactions. And plus, with auto discovery, it can discover a lot of noise that's not relevant, to your monitoring needs. So you want to exclude those so you can stay below that limit, get rid of all that extra noise, and be focused on key performance indicators so you can be able to discover issues faster and lower your MTTR.
Yeah, great point. Just to add to that, the limit itself is 200 per application and 50 per node. That can be changed, but I want to call out one other key point. When we identify our key business transactions, we want to make sure that those are not buckets. And what I mean by a bucket in AppD is AppD might group URLs based on the third segment of the URL, but the actual important endpoint, like the API, might be the fifth segment. And we might have 10 different APIs. If that is now bucketized in AppD, we're grouping 10 distinct APIs that might be business critical into one transaction based on the first three segments. If all 10, we can probably safely assume have very different performance. And so it's really critical that when you're identifying your business critical transactions, that those become distinct transactions and not buckets in AppD, or you're going to struggle with alerting. You need the tool to be able to baseline the distinct critical call and not be polluted with other things in the bucket if it's a critical transaction. And then and only then will you be successful in tuning alerts for that endpoint. Tuning alerts on a bucket is very hard and usually ends up creating situations where your health rules stopped providing value because thresholds were pushed so high that they almost don't fire anymore. Or when they fire, they're not actionable. Buckets are generally the culprit for that, alerting on a bucket.
And we can provide, links to, more in-depth business transaction tuning in the chat as well. When this is posted out in our YouTube, definitely take the opportunity to look for business transaction tuning videos there. It can be pretty in-depth, and it could turn into a gotcha, just like Drew's calling out, where things are rolling up under something else and you miss another call that you want prioritized and separated out. So good call outs, things I've definitely experienced as a customer and over on this side at Cisco.
And one last thing I mentioned on the last block, configure alerting. Not only configuring alerting, but you also, with business transactions, you probably want to turn on anomaly detection to catch those outliers that the system just picked up through AI. So you can have that machine learning and understanding of what's going on, and so it can discover those anomalies. So that's a big thing that I would turn on as far as along with configuring alerts, is turning on anomaly detection.
It's a great point, Kelvin. And just if you're brand new to AppD, that is a controller side setting that doesn't impact the application performance. All right. Operational readiness. This is a big one for me. Identify your monitoring team, the key stakeholders responsible for ongoing maintenance. Do they have the necessary skills and resources to know how to use the tool based on what we configured for them? We want to plan to tune our service entry points and health rules after deployment to optimize monitoring effectiveness. These are all things that are we're going to be in a pre-prod stage before we actually go live and connect it with our ITSM tools for auto incident tracking as a best practice. For example, make sure we know when that alert fires, people know what it means, what they need to look at, and if there's not a problem with the health of the application and there was a problem with the health rule that indicated, or like a false positive, a feedback loop to get us from pre-production to ready to go live in a week or so is a great thing to think about.
And to help you in those endeavors, you have a lot of resources. As a customer of Cisco's, you have the ability to not only, send people through the Cisco University and take courses, depending on, what type of role they're going to play in using this tool. But you also have an account team with dedicated resources, and they can connect you or that group with somebody like us. We're the customer success, experts. We're engineers that have been using the tool. We are familiar with it. We can explain to you not only how to set things up, but also how to use it and how to think about it and how to work it into your process. So if you're unsure as an implementer, if you're unsure as an admin, an app owner, and you know that this is needed and you're trying to wrap your head around how this group is going to use it, maybe you're a shared services team, maybe, whatever the case may be of your role, but you're also going to want to make sure that the tool gets adopted, or all of this work that you put in setting things up is for nothing, right? And then at the same time, monitoring of key business assets, or your infrastructure is going to be extremely important. So you want people using it, you want it baked into their process. We have a saying where, when you're rolling out AppDynamics, you want to align the 3 Ps. It's people, process, and products. In this case, we were talking about your monitoring solutions that you have available from AppDynamics and mapping them out based on the what you guys have versus what solution you need in place, and then you want to start aligning the people behind it and improve their processes, based on what their feedback is. Maybe they have SOPs already existing and you can just think of how to fit the tool into that. This becomes very important, and at the same time, you're not alone. Like I said, you have the Cisco University, you have your account team that is represented by Cisco. Your implementer should have access to talking to those folks. They can set you up with customer success engineers and experts as well. There's our YouTube page, which will give more information. There's community pages. We'll give you more resources like this at the end, but you're not alone. Don't stress out, but it is a very important point to start baking it in and getting people in the know of how to use the new tool you have.
I'd like to discuss this last one on the list here, the plan for tuning service entry points and health rules post-deployment. AppDynamics, you just don't put it in place and it take care of everything. You're going to have to revisit due to code changes and just performance changes. Could be due to hardware changes. So this is an ongoing thing because you can have a new key performance indicator introduced into your application that you want to monitor. You may have to do some configuration of that later on in the process. So it's not just put it in place and let it run. You do have to pay attention to it and understand what you want to monitor in case you have code upgrades or new things introduced into the application that you want to monitor. So it's something that you have to revisit and make sure that your key performance indicators are being monitored over time. So I would say you probably want to set up maybe a monthly talk with the app team to make sure that the business transactions that they want to monitor are being monitored, or any key performance indicators, are actively being monitored.
Okay, great point. All right, documentation and communication. You want to make sure we maintain updated architecture diagrams and documentation throughout the deployment. If you have a playbook or consistent communication plans, make sure that you keep those documents updated. That way you can establish communication plans for things like deployment status updates and escalation paths to ensure smooth coordination.
And this is part of what Calvin and or what all three of us were saying on the last slide too. You want to make sure that everyone's kind of talking to each other. You want to make sure if you're an AppD admin or an implementer, you're going to want to revisit things every so often. Obviously the developers have a lot going on in their sprints, so being setting a standard and precedence ahead of time and helping them understand why, will help them justify, creating a little bit of space or wiggle room for, letting you guys know of any changes. Or, sometimes it's just simple, there's a new call coming out that's really, really important for a new flow in an existing application. And you just want to they want to make sure that they're able to monitor that correctly, and you're going to want to be able to help them. And so if you want them to be able to instrument that change themselves, or meaning like through the UI, just setting up a new endpoint, or a business transaction, then, at least they will know how to do that. They can be, self-regulated, but at the same time, if they're going crazy and they're putting over, like what Calvin said earlier, the 200 limit for business transactions, then there's probably a chance that they're missing stuff. So by having documentation of what's going on, the changes, maybe they have their own site of things that you can look at as an AppD admin, and then just regular communication, like also like Kelvin and Drew were saying, where you might want to reconvene with them every so often. It just kind of keeps everybody in lockstep, going towards having a full end-to-end view of the environment, all of the IT assets, and it just doesn't get away from you. You know, out of sight, out of mind. But if people are using this regularly, you know, you want to think about what they're looking at regularly and make sure that they have what they need, because you know, no one likes getting woken up at 3 in the morning and to find out that somebody else changed stuff without letting anybody know. Think of it that way. Be considerate, and at the same time, if you're the owner of AppDynamics, you also want this to be something that is usable. So do the right thing for your customers by, you know, keeping up on that communication as well.
All right. To summarize our best practices, if you're new, you know, we have free trials that are available of our SaaS controller, or you know, you can reach out and discuss doing an on-prem proof of concept. So we want to use our flow maps and custom dashboards early to visualize application behavior, to know that our map looks correct. We want to leverage things like the Smart Agent for lifecycle management or agent version control. If you can't do that, perhaps if you're not going to use the Smart Agent, you know, other CI/CD pipeline tools or configuration management tools can be very helpful here to automate things. Regularly review and upgrade agents, right? You want to stay in support. And if you identify a bug or identify a reason to upgrade, try not to end up with 20 different upgraded versions across your applications. Version control is very helpful. You want to customize your health rules and alerts to reduce noise. Generally, you can have a standard framework for alerting, but the values that are going to be inside the actual health rules themselves are distinct per application. So just know that, and make sure you tune them to make sure they're only actionable. We definitely don't want noise. You want to encrypt sensitive credentials to maintain security compliance. And we really want to engage business stakeholders continuously to prioritize observability focused monitoring. When we tie it to business value, we can always quantify the results and the effort that it took to get us there, and tie it directly to business value. Next steps, in our next session, Kelvin will be doing an agent deployment overview and specifically talking about the Smart Agent. And we're going to discuss the app tier node hierarchy in more detail. Thanks for coming.
All right, let's go ahead and great job, Drew. Great job, everybody. And let's go ahead and open the floor for Q&A. So awesome job, guys. You know, we went over a lot of information. We all come from various backgrounds where we help customers, we work customers, you know, we all have a lot of insights to give you. So hopefully we didn't overwhelm you with our chat. We thought it would be a little bit better for you to get extra context. We usually try to focus these Expert Insight series a little bit more around demos, but with it being a planning, you know, all about the importance of planning and what to plan for, it's a little bit different than, you know, just going into the controller and showing you things that you've already seen of what you could get or what you can't get. We want to help you guys plan correctly. So we wanted to spend a little extra time. We all had a lot of insight. Like I said, we all have a lot of background to kind of back that up. But what do you do beyond that? The additional resources that you have is we have multiple communities that you can join, as well learning opportunities. So I would highly recommend getting into the community.cisco.com, which, you know, has a lot of discussion, especially around the integration of tools with both AppDynamics and other Cisco products. And then, you know, Cisco also owns Splunk, and Splunk is the observability suite under Cisco's flag there. So also you can check out the community.splunk.com, which also has AppDynamics, a lot of the AppDynamics discussions that used to be on the old AppDynamics website. They're all moved over and migrated over to the Splunk website now. You know, there's a lot of really good and powerful integration discussions, and people that have had problems that other people in the community have helped them work out, or custom needs that that they were trying to go for, that they again, they had a community, they had people behind them. It becomes very important dealing with these kinds of things, where if you're doing something that no one else has done, get some help, make it a discussion, work with your community, work with your, and then of course you have the account team that I mentioned earlier, people actually that are representatives of Cisco working with you guys as our customers that could set you up with, you might have professional services, you might have, customer success experts like ourselves, where we come in and we help, our job is to help you guys be successful. So if you guys need something like that, definitely put in a request for that. And then if you like this content that we created for you here, and you would like to see not only these longer discussions, but also maybe short videos, that you can go on to our YouTube page, which is youtube.com/@Cisco Observability. We have a good amount of information there. We have playlists. Again, we have long videos, short videos, and at the same time, comments are turned on. So let us know what you like, what you don't like, how we can make things better. Like, subscribe, we appreciate it. It supports us. And then at the same time too, say that you're going towards wanting to get certified. You're wanting to, show the world that, you have these badges, you can put it on your resume, whatever the case may be. Go check out u.cisco.com, where you can get, additional training and go towards certification tracks that it, like I said, becomes very powerful to put on your resume and get yourself certified. As always, we really appreciate you guys being here, and we would love to know how you think that we did. Please check out our Slido, whatever you can do, we really appreciate it. But ultimately, thank you for being here. Thanks for making this success, and we will see you next week.